Hey everyone, welcome back to Virginia Venture Connect. Today we have Chris Lloyd, Senior Vice President of McGuireWoods Consulting with us today. Today is first business day after the whole world knows that Joe Biden is now President-elect of the United States. And we have Chris here with us today to discuss the ramifications of Biden's win and how that will affect startups within Virginia. So Chris, what can you tell us about how this election will affect startups and their respective founders?
Sure, and thanks, Justin. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Just by way of background, a little bit, McGuireWoods Consulting, we're the public affairs arm of the McGuireWoods law firm, and my interest in venture capital and startup activity really goes to our work here at McGuireWoods on behalf of Go Virginia, which I think many people are familiar with, is an initiative that was launched by Virginia's business community to turn around Virginia's economy. We'd become overly dependent on federal spending, and job growth and entrepreneurship in Virginia was lagging a lot of other states. We've been heavily involved with that. Of course, Go Virginia really rested on four pillars, of which entrepreneurship and innovation was one of them, which led to the creation of VRIC originally. Then there was the Techonomy study that called for these entrepreneurial organizations in every region, which then eventually led to the VIPA legislation that was passed earlier this year. So really, I've spent a lot of time working on these kind of initiatives around the state. Go Virginia has funded a number of them. RAMP down in Hampton Road, 757 Angels, the Stant Creative Community Fund. So it's certainly a policy area that I've focused a great deal on. But speaking of the election, I think it's going to be a very interesting time for startups. There's certainly already discussion, Justin, as you're well aware, of a fourth stimulus package. To be honest, that we're already on number 3. That was the CARES Act, was technically the third stimulus package. Whether that comes to be during this lame duck period of Congress or we wait until the president-elect's in office remains to be seen. But what does that mean? When you think of the stimulus package, you think of $1,200 checks going out to people and helping on unemployment. But I think you're going to see some discussion. It's going to vary a great deal state by state of another round of payments to the states for money that they can use. And you're going to see a great deal of variability. If you're Illinois or Rhode Island or Connecticut or New York or California, which has been fiscally very harmed by the pandemic and has extensive obligations with regards to pension funds and other things, any of those funds are really going to be just used for continuation of government. If you look at states like Virginia or North Carolina or Georgia or other states with a strong research base and a strong fiscal basis, I think there could be the opportunity, and in fact, we should work towards the opportunity of using some of these stimulus monies to make long-term investments in our states. Instead of just, and I'm not saying that there aren't businesses that are hurting. There absolutely are, and there will be businesses, particularly in the hospitality sector, that continue to be hurting. But I'm already starting to hear some discussion. I know that others in the state are starting to try to say, well, if we're going to get these additional monies here in Virginia, why don't we set up some sort of evergreen fund? Use that money to invest in some research and development, to get entrepreneurs working, to invest in innovation and research and development, and then have that money in venture funds, whatever, that it can be cycled back. So it's not just spend it by the end of the year and hope the good things happen, but really create something that's long-term. I think there's that opportunity. Many people may recall that during the reconvened session earlier this year, the governor created a COVID relief fund funded by the tax on these skills machines around the state. That money can be used for small business support. I think there's some people saying that money could go into some sort of evergreen fund or venture fund. So I think, there's those opportunities that come from a stimulus package. Then I think, and we can talk about this later, Justin, is kind of what the impacts of potential tax rate changes, other changes in regulation, and other priorities of the Biden administration will have upon the venture industry and innovation.
So, and just to clarify, when you mean evergreen fund, this is not the same as the PPP loan stimulus, where folks just, they get it, they represent that they're adversely affected by COVID, and then they have to spend the money within certain parameters, and then it's a debt that's ultimately forgiven, hopefully, by the SBA and the underwriter of the loan. So this evergreen fund,
certainly not that.
So this evergreen fund, are other countries doing this? Is there any template that the U.S. can adopt? Is there anything that's working in this?
Yeah, I've heard something about a similar program underway in Great Britain. And then you're starting to see the concept really goes to the Economic Development Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, has lent money in a revolving fund or an evergreen fund. They sometimes use those funds interchangeably for whenever there were big plant closures or economic dislocations in the past. Is that communities would be given money to kind of move to transition. And the Economic Development Administration has recently made some policy changes to allow more of that. So that communities can keep the monies that they receive and reinvest them in future businesses. Again, some sort of revolver, some sort of evergreen fund. And I think if we could look at some of those models, that would be a good way to spend this money.
I would assume, and I wonder what your thoughts are, that an evergreen fund would cost the taxpayers much less than the PPP loan cost everyone. And I would imagine too that is it perhaps going to be more bipartisan in nature? Do you have any insights there?
I would certainly think it would be more bipartisan in nature, and hopefully it would avoid the great deal of fraud that happened with the PPP. I mean, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal this weekend that talked about how the PPP fund, not that it didn't help a lot of great companies, but how it was truly rife with fraud. And I think if you had some sort of evergreen fund or revolving fund, you'd have a professional management approach to it. I think you'd have a bipartisan concept, and you'd have certain goals that you were trying to achieve with it.
Yeah, and I've thought a lot about that too, having dealt with clients applying for the PPP loan, because on the one hand, you want the money to come out as quickly as possible. And so I think that the barriers to entry, you make them as low as possible, which perhaps allows for more fraudulent acts to occur. Whereas on the flip side, if you really just pinned it down and magnified the underwriting criteria for the PPP loan, perhaps folks wouldn't have got the money as quickly as they needed. And that could have been perhaps much worse. I'm not sure which side is right, but it's just something to think about. And I think that with coronavirus and perhaps even the news today that Pfizer has a vaccine that's 90% effective, and the Dow Jones has adjusted accordingly with a 1,600 point pop just this morning, that maybe this fund has less of a timeliness factor, especially for startups, because it seems like just maybe we're on the back end of this pandemic once we have a vaccine and it's deployed to everyone.
Well, Justin, I think what you're seeing, the smart countries around the world and the smart state governments and smart local governments are focusing. Yes, we're still very much have the pandemic. We've got to get through the pandemic, but those that are visionary are thinking about resiliency and recovery. It's not, are we going to come out of this, but when we come out of this, how are we going to have a firm foundation for the future? And I think, investing in entrepreneurship, spurring research and development. I mean, we all know that that's the foundation of a strong economy, and I think that's where we should see investments be made.
Yeah, and so related to this, and related to this entire discussion, really is Biden's tax plan, which you briefly mentioned earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, but right now the current corporate tax rate is a flat 21%. And Biden is proposing to increase it to a flat 28%, and that's before dividends. That's just the corporate tax rate. And so, from where I sit and with my C corporation clients, a flat 21% corporate tax rate has been fantastic, because if you take your after-tax earnings and reinvest those earnings into your corporation, you're going to have a much better after-tax earnings position than compared to, say, everything else being equal, you're taxed as a partnership, say you're an LLC, assuming that your members are all highest marginal rate taxpayers. So that's been good. And I just wonder, do you think this will stifle startups acting as C corporations? Do you think what do you think the effect will be on investment? Just what are your general thoughts on this proposal?
Yeah. It's clear that the Trump tax package did unleash a great deal of investment by corporations. We're certainly seeing in our client base that the corporations are washing cash and trying to deploy that cash for automation, for in their facilities, brand new facilities. I think you're seeing a lot of institutional money invested in real estate and other sort of activities. And I think that if we were to change those policies, it could certainly have a chilling effect on some of those. At the end of the day, though, don't forget, we still don't know as of today what the Senate's going to look like. And so, I think the president certainly will propose a rollback of a number of the Trump tax cuts. Whether those are able to make it through the Senate, again, we don't know what the ultimate composition of the Senate's going to be, but I think it is safe to assume that not everything as it exists today will remain. And so again, I think you would have some, if you change the corporate income tax rate, you change the capital gains rate, you change depreciation schedules from the very favorable treatment that they now have, you're certainly going to see some chilling effect upon those sorts of investments. At the same time, you may see some opportunities. The president's made it very clear that climate change is going to be a big focus, resiliency, and those kind of activities. Obviously, COVID and anything related to public health is going to be a big priority for this administration. And so you may see some redirection of efforts, again, spurred by federal spending. Again, so you're not talking on the fiscal side, meaning the taxation side, but if you see those sorts of investments in climate change, alternative energy, public health, then are there opportunities there for investments and good investments that are teamed up with those priorities?
Yeah, I could see an evergreen fund that particularly, maybe even disproportionately allocates funds to perhaps industries in greater need, according to the Biden administration, including green jobs and health, biotech, life sciences related companies, which we have a little bit of that now in Virginia. And it seems to be the wave of the future, and perhaps even the present. So that will be interesting to follow. When you think of Virginia in particular, are there any industries that you think, startup industries that you think have been hit particularly hard, that need an extra layer of protection as we try to get out of this pandemic?
That's a very interesting question, Justin. I think we all know the hospitality industry and retail have been hit very, very hard. And those are very important sectors to the Virginia economy, particularly in the Hampton Roads area of the state. Particular hospitality is very important. I think I wouldn't say that there's been many that have been hit hard, disproportionately so, but I do think that there are ones. Anything that's defense related. Virginia's always done very, very well with anything that's defense related investments in that. Is that going to be as emphasized in a Biden administration? We've been pouring money into the Pentagon, and the Pentagon's been doing very well here lately. Is that going to be as much of a priority in the Biden administration? Biohealth and bioscience, I think, and life sciences generally, is there the opportunity for reshoring some of those opportunities? And, Virginia's very well positioned given our port, given our access to federal facilities, given our education system. There's some opportunities there. So it's not that we've done poorly, but we could be doing so much better than where we are. We're hitting, honestly, I think in many of those sectors, we're hitting below our weight in where we should be. Virginia, we're the 12th largest state, but when you look at the amount of R&D spending and innovation in the state, we lag behind many of our competitors. So again, I don't think that anybody's done especially poorly. It's just, I think we're not doing what we should be doing. Okay.
So a quick comment and then two follow-up questions for you, which I'm curious to hear your answer on. One is, I've been very intrigued to watch what's been happening in San Francisco right now. I don't know if you've been seeing that, but it's been somewhat of an exodus out of there. And I think that there's going to be a lot of secondary markets, like several cities within Virginia, that can really benefit from that. And so with that being said, if you were an advisor to President-elect Biden, what would be the main thing? And let's say you were a delegate on behalf of Virginia. What would you say to Biden? What does he need to do for Virginia in particular to help us succeed?
I think first and foremost is, and we've already got some of the pieces coming together with the tech talent pipeline that was put in place with regards to Amazon, really getting significant alignment between what our education system is producing with regards to degrees, the innovation and the investments that they're making, and what the business community says it wants. Unfortunately, Virginia and a lot of other states, those are just two ships passing in the night sometimes. And a lot of that is because of federal restrictions in how funds are spent on training, And I think if you could get some alignment in really saying, okay, here are the sectors, the industry sectors that are going to be the growth sectors for the next 20 years, and we should invest heavily in those and get that alignment between what the, automation, artificial intelligence, resiliency, climate change, those issues where everybody, alternative energy, where everybody knows you're going to see growth over the next few years. We don't need to train more cosmetologists in this state. And not that you getting your hair cut isn't important, but unfortunately that's what we have training programs. You survey Virginia's high schools and you find that we've got courses in fashion design. I mean, the last time Virginia was fashionable was the 1760s when we wore buckles on our shoes and tri-cornered hats. And so getting that alignment between the business community and removing some of those federal obstacles would be number one. Number two, I think you probably do need some incentives, tax incentives or other incentives for reshoring. I think everybody already sees the opportunities that we need to shorten the supply chain, and we need to have some of our pharmaceuticals and PPE located here domestically, but there's still a huge cost disadvantage from a labor perspective that the U.S. has compared to a Vietnam or an Indonesia or an India. So I think some tax incentives that go along with that would be good as well.
I agree. So would you modify, if you were an advisor to the Virginia governor, would you modify your comments at all there, or would it be the same?
It would be absolutely the same.
Okay.
Understanding that, again, some of the restrictions at the federal level on the training programs aren't controlled by the state government, but the state, you're already seeing the governor make some initiatives around that. And I think you're seeing a growing awareness among policy directors that we need to get that alignment between the business community and our universities.
Yeah, that's very insightful and interesting. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there any other general comments or lines of thinking that you'd like to share,
I think the only thing that I think we want to look out for, Justin, is, again, since we do not know where the Senate's going to be, and odds are, no Republicans won a statewide runoff in Georgia for a long time. Of course, Georgia hadn't flipped for a long time. So the odds are, as of right now, that people think that the Republicans control the Senate. So the president-elect's already made a lot of noises about using executive actions and the regulatory apparatus of the federal government to advance some of their agenda. And I think just something we need to be careful about, both at the state and the federal level, is to make sure that doesn't stifle innovation. In that either slowing down the patent process or the review process or whatever, or too many workplace restrictions or whatever, I think we just need to be on the lookout for that. And I'm not saying I absolutely predict it, but I think it is another, along with the fiscal policy and the tax policies and those other areas that I talked about earlier, is watching what's going to happen on the regulatory front and how we stay on the right side of that will be very important. And again, Justin, thanks for the opportunity to be with you today.
Chris, thank you. See you next time, everyone.